October 14, 1943. Wehrmacht Personnel Office, Smolensk District, occupied Soviet territory. The filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. 3 tall windows faced south, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, ink, and the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned anymore. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of orders, requisitions, casualty reports, and the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. He processed paperwork. That was his war. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died at places like Kursk and Kharkov, Klaus Hartmann stamped documents, filed correspondence, and maintained the meticulous record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. He was good at this work. Methodical. Organized. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. His superior officer, Hauptmann Werner Dietrich, had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. Metal. Gray. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. Personnel transfers. Supply requisitions. Intelligence summaries. Execution orders. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. Bottom drawer. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. That was the official terminology. Security operations. The phrase covered many things. Partisan sweeps. Reprisal actions. The shooting of hostages. The liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Alphabetically. By date. By unit designation. He read them because reading was part of filing. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. So he read about villages burned. About civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. He read these things and then filed them. That was his job. Just paperwork. Just administration. Someone had to maintain the records. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officers' quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. The office operated on a rigid schedule. Morning documents arrived at 0800. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. High-priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich immediately. Routine administrative materials he processed himself. By 1700 hours, everything that had arrived that day should be filed, copied if necessary, and properly documented in the master log. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. His efficiency was appreciated. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. On October 14, the morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Supply requests from various units. Personnel transfer orders. Intelligence summaries. Medical reports. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The first execution order was routine. If such a thing could be called routine. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. October 14, according to the 1943, was membership in Jewish families that had evaded earlier security Smolensk district. Occupied they had been discovered hiding in cellars and outbuildings. The filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. The order specified that they were to be transported to a clearing 3 kilometers north of their pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper. Their bodies would be buried in a massive of coal smoke from the heating system. The execution detail would consist of 12 men under the command inside the office name appeared on the order. Uncomfortably cold. Hartmann read this document 3 times. 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. The filing designation was unclear. His uniform was clean but worn he read this elbow 3 times. His fingers were stained with ink from the standard carbon paper he used to make copies of orders. It bore the proper signatures, casualty reports, and the authorization of administrative documents that fed the machinery. Everything about it was in perfect order. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. He looked at the list of names. Paperwork. 42 that was his war. The youngest was a girl from his hometown near Stuttgart, 8 years died at places like Kursk. There was a family unit listed together. Hartmann stamped documents, mother filed correspondence, 3 children, and maintained the meticulous record-keeping systems 11, that German military 14. Administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. He didn't know why he focused on that family particularly. Methodical. Maybe because organized. 3 children seemed like a lot. The kind of man who double-checked because the name Brenner reminded him of every document ended up in its proper folder. Her Brenner. His superior officer, mathematics, Hauptmann Werner Dietrich, a kind man who had let 3 times stay out of the class to work on problems he found difficult. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German military security. Hartmann understood that much even through the official language. Metal. They were simply Jewish. Gray. That was their crime. Labeled with alphanumeric codes existing that designated Jewish different territories controlled by the Reich. Personnel orders described them as security threats. Supply but the filing system Hartmann maintained intelligence enough similar documents that he understood execution orders. This wasn't about military security. Occupied cabinet number 12. This was about something else entirely. Bottom drawer. He sat at his desk inside with the execution order in his hand. Security operations. Outside, the October sun was climbing terminology. A truck rattled past on the street below. The phrase covered someone in another office was typing. Partisan sweep. The sound came through the wall in rhythmic mechanical bursts. The shooting of hostages. Hartmann looked at Cabinet 12. The liquidation of civilians. Bottom threats to military security. That's where this document belonged. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. 7 months. Alphabetically. This was just one more piece of paper. Date. One more administrative task. He read them because reading was part of record keeping that accompanied occupation. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize on his desk. So he read about villages burned. No about civilians executed as the execution wasn't scheduled for 3 days. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. Lunch came and went. He read the documents remained on his desk. That was his job. 1,500 hours. Just paperwork. He still hadn't filed it. Just administration. At 1,600 hours. Someone had to maintain the records. Sitting beside his coffee Someone had to ensure the system to function Cabinet 12 and place it in the proper folder. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. Walked through the office at 16:30. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officer's Hartmann's desk. He could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like processed documents, and continued to his own office with a rigid schedule. He didn't notice the single unfiled paper lying face down beneath a supply requisition them by priority and type. At 1,700 priority items Hartmann closed the filing cabinets for the day. Routine administrative materials he processed on a chain attached to his belt. By 1,700 hours, he gathered his everything that had arrived that day should be filed. He walked down copied flights of stairs and out into the cold October master log. The execution order remained on his desk. Made it work. Unfiled. His efficiency was appreciated. For the first time in 7 months he had received a commendation noting that his filing failed to file a document before leaving to locate any document within minutes. He told himself he would file it tomorrow morning. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Before the new day's documents arrived. On October 14th, a simple oversight. The morning document delivery included anyone could forget a single piece of paper among 47 supply different requests from various units. It didn't mean anything. Personnel transfer orders. It was just an accident. Intelligence a momentary lapse in an otherwise medical record of administrative efficiency. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. He ate dinner in the officer's mess. The first execution order was routine. He played cards with 2 other clerks. If such a thing could be called routine. He lay in his bunk listening to distant artillery. The shooting of 12 civilians. He didn't sleep well providing food to partisan units. Tomorrow, he told himself. The order had already been carried out. He would 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. October 14, 1943. Hartmann arrived at his desk at Smolensk District, occupied Soviet territory. 15 minutes earlier than usual. The filing room occupied the execution order was exactly where he'd left it before the German invasion. Face down beneath a supply requisition. Three tall windows faced south, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, Rachel Brenner, and the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned. Scheduled to be shot in 48 hours. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere arrived at 0800 and just barely tolerable. 29 items today. 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly his whenever he performed familiar motions while his mind circled around the unfiled execution order like a man walking around a hole in the ice. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of orders. By 1,000 hours, he had processed and filed the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. 2 remained on his desk. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months and the execution order from yesterday. He processed paperwork. He filed the personnel transfer. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart at 11 died at places like Clerk and requested a file from Hartmann stamped documents. Hartmann retrieved it immediately and maintained the meticulous record complimented him again on the filing system administration demanded even in the chaos everything exactly where it should be. He was good at this work. Methodical. Hartmann accepted the compliment with the kind of man who double-checked the execution order remained certain every document ended up in its proper folder. Hartmann sat in the mess hall and ate bread and soup without tasting it. Had commended him 3 times around for his efficiency. Other soldiers talked about the war. Filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. The partisan attacks increasing in frequency. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. The rumors of another winter approaching. Metal. Hartmann said nothing. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. The execution order was scheduled for implementation in 36 hours. Supply requisitions. If he filed it now, the intelligence unit would retrieve it tomorrow morning. Execution October 16th. Giving them time to prepare for the action on October 17. 12. That was standard procedure. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations before implementation. That was the official terminology. 12. Security operations. The proper phrase covered many things. All he had to do was place the document in the folder. Reprisal actions. Close the drawer. The shooting of hostages. Lock the cabinet. The liquidation of civilians would continue functioning military security. His hand held the execution documents the same way he filed everything else. His other hand held the folder. Alphabetically. He didn't place the document in the folder. By date. Instead, he closed the cabinet drawer without filing because reading was part of filing. He told himself he would do it after the afternoon what a document contained in order to categorize more pressing matters to attend to first. So he read about villages burned, administrative priorities, about civilians executed as punishment for partisan activities, about the afternoon delegations transferred to collection points and then disappearing from the administrative them all by 1630. He read these things filed and then filed properly. That was his job. The execution order. Just paperwork. It remained on his desk. Just administration. Face down now. Someone had to maintain the records. Beneath a stack of supply forms someone had to ensure the system functioned properly yet. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things of filing cabinets. They helped him sleep at night in a narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like October 16th. The execution was scheduled for tomorrow. The in-document unit would need to retrieve the order this morning. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. Hartmann arrived at his desk at 0730 immediately. Extra early. Routine administrative materials to file the documents before anyone noticed it was by 1700 hours. But when everything that had arrived his hands would be filed, copied if necessary. He sat at his desk staring documented in the master log. Rachel Brenner. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. 24 hours to live unless someone retrieved this execution order. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document 31 documents. This ability to process retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Except the execution order. On October 14th, it stayed on his desk, delivery now covered by 47 supply requisitions and a stack of supply requests from various units. At 1,000 hours, personnel transfer order from the security division intelligence the execution order entered the file. Medical reports. He approached Hartmann's execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The man was going to ask for the order was routine. If such a thing could be called routine filed. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. But the order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. A security report Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation retrieved it from Cabinet 11 in less than 30 seconds. Cabinet 12, the Oberlieutenant thanked him and left. Designation that had executed Hartmann the order. Sat back down. The second execution order was shaking slightly. It had not yet been carried out against the desk until they stopped. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th. The execution order remained unfiled. 3 days away. Nobody had asked for it yet. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention. Maybe the implementing unit had received their own copy. Men, women, maybe children. Hartmann's copy was just ages for the ranging from 8 years old to 67. Maybe nobody would notice if it wasn't filed until after the execution had occurred. He was lying to himself. 1943. He knew he was lying to himself. Wehrmacht Personnel Office. Execution orders issued to implementing units required confirmation copies in the central filing occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. If the implementing unit didn't have the order, windows they couldn't legally proceed with the execution. Autumn light that caught dust particles. The system required in air that smelled of paper, ink, and if nobody retrieved the execution order, the execution barely functioned anymore. At least not legally. Inside the office hovered not according to Wehrmacht administrative procedures. Just barely tolerable. Hartmann was beginning to understand what he was doing. Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk what he was not slightly whenever he shifted his weight. This wasn't an accident anymore. His uniform was clean but wasn't a sin at filing oversight. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of orders, requisitions, deniable, casualty reports, but a choice and the endless stream of administrative documents he was sabotaging the system. Occupation. The system he had maintained so to this office for 7 months. The system that had earned him 3 commendations. That was his war. The system that made him valuable. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died from combat duty by his administrative officials. Klaus Hartmann stamped documents. All he had to do to preserve that safety was maintain the meticulous record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the 10 seconds of work. He was good at this work. Then everything would return to normal. Organized. The execution would proceed. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper would continue being an exemplary clerk in the Wehrmacht administrative apparatus. Dietrich had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. At 1,500 Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. He stopped at Hartmann's desk. 16 filing everything in order. Obergefreiter. Metal. Jaw. Gray. Herr Hauptmann. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. Keep up the good work. Personnel transfers. He didn't notice the execution order supply requisitions. Stack of processed supply forms. Intelligence summaries. At 1700, execution Hartmann locked the cabinets. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. The execution order remained on his desk for the 3rd consecutive night. The documents inside detailed the execution was scheduled for tomorrow mornings. October 17th, 0900 hours. Security operations. That night, Hartmann lay in his bunk thinking about what he had done. Partisan sweeps, or rather, what he hadn't done. Reprisal actions. The distinction seemed important. The shooting of hostages. He hadn't destroyed the liquidation of civilians. Hadn't hidden it to military security. Hadn't taken any overt action that could be identified the same way he filed everything else. Resistance. Alphabetically. He had simply failed to file by date. That was all. By unit designation. A clerk who forgot to file because reading was part of filing. Careless perhaps. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. Not treasonous. So he read about villages burned. Just incompetent. About civilians for the first time in 7 months for partisan activity. Unless they asked about why he hadn't populations transferred to collection unless they points examined his desk and found the administrative other papers. He read these things and then whether the oversight was delivered. That was his job. Then it would be sabotage. Just paperwork. Interference with security operations. Someone had to maintain the enemies of the Reich. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. Court-martial. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. His family back in Stuttgart would receive at night in a narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like for the order yet. And the office operated on when the execution was supposed to happen. Morning documents arrived to discover they didn't have proper authorization. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. They might proceed anyway. High priority items they might not. Dietrich immediately. Hartmann didn't know. Routine administrative materials he processed himself. Delay. By 1700 maybe hours, someone would question whether the order was valid without proper administrative confirmation, and properly documented in the master log. Probably not. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. Rachel Brenner was 8 years old. Was appreciated. That fact kept circling the commendation, noting that his filing system allowed senior officers she was going to die tomorrow unless someone noticed the execution order. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. On October 14th, the morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Supply requests from various units. Personnel transfer orders. Intelligence summaries. Medical reports. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The first execution order was routine. If such a thing could be called routine. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. October 17, 1943. Wehrmacht personnel office, Smolensk district. The execution was scheduled for 0900. The filing room occupied sat at his desk trying to enter a municipal building before the German invasion. His hands processed morning documents with tall windows facing out. His mind calculated distances and time dust particles suspended in air. The detention facility was 17 kilometers from this office. Coal smoke from the heating system. The execution site was 3 kilometers from the detention facility. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere. If the implementing unit discovered they needed the order, they could send someone to retrieve it. 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk 5 minutes to locate whenever he shifted his weight. 30 minutes back. His uniform was clean, the execution would be delayed by at least an hour. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon unless they decided to make copies of proper documentation, requisitions, casualty unless reports, they made a phone call and the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. Unless Hauptmann Dietrich happened to walk through had been assigned to this office for 7 months. At 0845, the phone on Dietrich's desk rang. While other young men could hear the conversation through the open door between places like Kursk and Kharkov, someone was calling about an execution scheduled for this correspondence, and maintained the meticulous record the implementation orders that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. This was it. He was good at this work. Questions would follow. Organized. Why wasn't the order filed? The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made responsible for this administrative failure in its proper folder. But Hauptmann Dietrich was saying something about checking with his clerk. Dietrich had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Hartmann. The filing system execution order for Brenner was a model of German organizational precision. Security Division 614 contains 16 filing cabinets. Should be filed. Metal. Can you locate it? Gray. This was the one labeled with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories from its hiding place on his desk, personnel transfer, the filing delay, and watch supply requisitions die. Intelligence would return to normal. Execution efficiency record would have one minor blemish. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. Checking now, Herr Hauptmann. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. Cabinet 12. That was the official terminology. He made a show of searching through the folder where the order should have been filed. The phrase covered many things. His hands moved papers back and forth. Reprisal actions slightly. The shooting of hostages. Opened the liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. Closed it. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Searched again. Alphabetically. It's not here, Herr Hauptmann. By date. Dietrich's expression shifted from patience to irritation. He read them because reading was part of filing. It was issued. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. I don't have a record of villages burned, sir. About civilians executed as punishment for the first actual lie. About everything before this had been passive in collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. Claiming he had never received the documents and was then filed hidden on his desk beneath a stack of supply forms. Just paperwork. Dietrich walked to the filing cabinet. Just administration. He searched the same drawer to maintain the records. Found nothing. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. Would you like me to check the master log? They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance where he recorded every document that passed through the office. The office operated on a rigid schedule. He opened it to October 14th. Morning documents arrived at 0800. Supply requested them by priority and personnel transfers. High priority items. Intelligence summaries. Dietrich immediately. 2 execution routine orders. Administrative materials. But only one of them was logged. By the missing order was the one for the Brenner that had arrived that day should be filed. There's no entry if necessary. Hartmann said, properly documented in the master log. His voice was steady. The system worked because Hartmann made an order that day. His efficiency was appreciated. From Security Division 709 he had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. Dietrich examined the log himself. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Everything properly documented. On October 14th, except for the order they delivery included 47 separate items. It must not have been delivered to this office. Supply requests from various units. Perhaps it went directly to the transfer orders. Dietrich intelligence summaries. It was medical reports. Sometimes orders bypassed orders from different security divisions operating in the district. Irregular, the first execution order was chaos of occupation administration. If such a thing could be called I'll inform them we don't have it on file. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing his office and partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. Hartmann sat at his desk. 1943. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Wehrmacht personnel office. Something cold had settled in his chest. Soviet territory. A kind of calm that came from crossing a line the third floor of what had been a municipal building. He had lied to a German superior officer. 3 tall windows faced the administrative letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of These were not passive failures. And the faint residue of coal smoke. These were active crimes that barely functioned anymore. He could hear Dietrich explaining to whoever was on the office that central filing had no record with the order and just barely tolerable. There would be delays while the situation was sorted out. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. Regulations were regulations. Clean but worn thin at the conversation ended. His fingers were stained with ink from his office looking annoyed. Paper he used to make copies of orders. The issuing division says they sent the order casualty reports, but if you have no record of receiving documents and it's not in our file of occupation, then it's lost somewhere in the administrative chain. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Should I search more thoroughly, sir? He processed paperwork. No point. That was his war. If you didn't log it, you didn't receive it. While other young men from his hometown near the issuing division died in places like Kursk and Kharkov, these administrative failures are unacceptable. Filed correspondence, and maintained the meticulous record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the error occurred during delivery to this office. He was good at this work. Not your fault if you never received it. Organized. But this delay is problematic. The kind of man who double-checked the prisoners have been in detention for every document ended up in its proper folder. We can't hold them indefinitely. His superior officer, the order will be reissued. Dietrich had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. New authorization system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. The whole administrative process starts 16 filing cabinets. A week. Metal. 7 days. Gray. 42 people would remain alive for at least 7 more days because the documents had been lost in the administrative personnel system. Transfers. Dietrich returned to his requisitions. The crisis intelligence summaries. A bureaucratic order had occurred. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. The system would correct itself eventually. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. He processed the morning documents. That was the official terminology. At 1,000 hours, he retrieved the execution order from its hiding place on his desk. The phrase covered many things. He held it in his hands for a moment. Sweeps. Then he walked to the corner of the office where a small coal-burning stove provided inadequate heat. The liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. The execution order Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. No document meant no administrative alphabetically. No record meant the order had never existed. By unit designation, a bureaucratic fiction. He read them because reading was part of filing. The Wehrmacht administrative system required you had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. Actions couldn't be legally implemented. So he read about villages burned. The system protected about itself civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. Paperwork had simply vanished. About Jewish populations administrative collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. A failed delivery. He read these things and then these things happened. That was his job. The execution didn't happen that morning. Just paperwork. Or that afternoon. Just administration. The implementing someone unit had to maintain the authorization in the filing system. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. For clarification. Klaus Hartmann told himself these began the process of creating a new order. They helped him sleep at night in a narrow bunk in the officers' quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. Hartmann didn't know if they would survive operated on a rigid schedule. Probably not. Morning documents arrived. The system would correct itself. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. It would reach his desk eventually. High-priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich. Then he would face the same choice again. Routine administrative materials he processed himself. Those people were alive. By 1700 hours, tomorrow, everything that had arrived that day should be filed, copied if necessary, they might still be documented in the master log. Each day represented a small victory because Hartmann made it work. Death that Hartmann had spent 7 months helping to maintain with his perfect filing system. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system more powerful than guns or bombs to locate any document within minutes. He had discovered that the system could be defeated by its own retrieve information was considered essential to military proper documentation. On October 14, could be lost. The morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Supply requests from various units. For the first time personnel transfer order, Klaus Hartmann understood what his war could summaries. Not medical reports to help kill people, and 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The system was breaking down. The first execution order was misfiled document at a time. If such a thing could be called Klaus Hartmann, the efficient clerk who had never made a mistake, had just used to providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more execution orders crossed Wehrmacht personnel office. None of them made it to Cabinet 12, Soviet territory. They all suffered various administrative floor of what had been a municipal building. One was logged incorrectly with a wrong date, rendering it invalid under Wehrmacht administrative pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in the air that smelled of paper. Hartmann apologized profusely and explained that he'd been suffering from headaches that affected his concentration anymore. Would the temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable? Everyone had headaches. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. The second order was filed in the wrong cabinet. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Mistake. His fingers were stained instead of Cabinet 12 carbon paper he used to make copies of orders, requisitions, easy to confuse security reports with execution of administrative process that fed the machinery of occupation. The order sat in the wrong location for 8 days before anyone noticed. He processed paperwork. The scheduled execution date had passed. While other young men at his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died, new administrative approvals would be required. Klaus Hartmann's stamped order was damaged by coffee spilled on it, and maintained the meticulous Hartmann had placed his cup too close to the military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. The coffee soaked through the paper. He was good at this making several crucial details illegible, including 2 of the authorization signatures. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. Damaged orders needed to be reissued. His superior officer, Hartmann apologized again, had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Was getting annoyed with these unusual errors. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. But they were plausible errors. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. Headaches. Metal. Clumsiness. Gray. The pressure of administrative alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. Anyone could make mistakes. Personnel transfers. You need to be more careful, Dietrich told Supply him. Requisitions. Your efficiency has been declining. Summaries. I apologize. Execution or Hauptmann. That last category occupied cabinet number 12. I can't have my filing system becoming unreliable. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security was becoming unreliable. That was the official terminology. Unreliable. Security operations documents suffered from Hartmann's. The phrase covered many things. Execution orders. Transfer orders sending Jews to concentration camps. The shooting of hostages. Implementation orders for partisan reprisals that included military casualties. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Supply requisitions. Alphabetically. Personnel transfers. By unit intelligence reports. He read them because reading was part of filing. All filed correctly. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. Processed with the same efficiency. So he read about villages burned 3 commendations. About civilians executed as punishment ordering deaths disappeared into administrative chaos. About Jewish populations transferred to arrived with cold rain and disappeared from the administrative record. The war news was bad. He read these things and then filed them. The Wehrmacht was in full retreat across much of the Eastern Front. Just paperwork. Partisan attacks were just administration. Security divisions were conducting more reprisal operations. Someone had to ensure the system functioned. More execution orders arrived at Hartmann's desk. Klaus Hartmann told himself he developed this every day. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officer's without arousing too much rumbling in the distance like those he filed normally. The office operated on a rigid schedule well enough that his superiors morning documents arrived at 0800. But approximately 1 in 3 sorted them by priority encountered problems. High priority items went to Hauptmann Dietrich Misfiled. Routine administrative materials he processed himself. Each failure created delays. Everything that had arrived each delay meant people lived long, copied if necessary. Some lived long enough that the military situation changed and the system worked because Hartmann made it work. Units that had issued orders were transferred to other sectors. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any paper trail became so tangled that implementing the original orders became more troublesome was considered essential to military effectiveness. And Hartmann discovered that reissuing orders took time. The morning document delivery and bureaucracy moved slowly under the best circumstances. Supply requests from various units of retreat and partisan personnel transfer moved glacially. Intelligence sometimes orders were lost in the reissue process. Reports. Sometimes new orders arrived from slightly different divisions operating in prisoner lists, different implementation dates. The first execution order was routine. Sometimes the new orders also encountered administrative difficulties. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food or prevented approximately 15 execution operations. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Each operation involved anywhere from 20 to 70 receiving the administrative confirmation. The mathematics were grim but simple. He would place it in cabinet somewhere 12, between 3 and 800 people remained alive who should have been dead according to the documents that crossed his desk. The second execution order was different. Some of them would die anyway. It had not yet been carried out. The system would eventually catch up. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th. Might escape 3 days away. Transfers. The order concerned a group of 40 Soviet forces had been held in temporary detention might simply live long enough that the war ended before their executions could be properly administered. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. Every day of delay was a chance for survival. Hartmann knew he was playing a dangerous game. His efficiency record was damaged. Hauptmann Dietrich was losing confidence in him. Other officers had noticed the unusual number of administrative errors coming from an office that had previously been exemplary. In late December, an investigation was ordered. Not a criminal investigation. Just an administrative review. The Wehrmacht wanted to understand why documentation from the Smolensk district filing office had become so unreliable. An Oberstleutnant from regional headquarters arrived to review procedures. He spent 3 days examining Hartmann's filing system, checking documents, comparing logs to filed papers. He found everything in order. Well, almost everything. There were those troubling errors. The missing documents. The misfiled orders. The damaged paperwork. Obergefreiter Hartmann, the Oberstleutnant said, your filing system is excellent. But your error rate has increased dramatically in recent months. Why? I don't know, sir. Perhaps the stress of the position. Are you sleeping well? Not always, sir. Eating properly? The rations are adequate, sir. Having any personal difficulties? No, sir. The Oberstleutnant studied Hartmann's face. You've served in this position for almost a year. That's a long time in administrative work on the Eastern Front. Perhaps you need a change. Combat duty might suit you better. This was it. The moment Hartmann had feared. Transfer to a combat unit would end his ability to lose documents. It would also probably end his life. Infantry replacement units on the Eastern Front in late 1943 had survival rates measured in weeks. I believe I can improve my performance here, sir. See that you do. Your filing system is too important to function unreliably. The investigation concluded. Hartmann received a warning about his declining efficiency but no punishment. He was told to be more careful. To double-check his work. To ensure documents were properly logged and filed. He promised improvement. And for 2 weeks, he filed everything perfectly. Including 3 execution orders that he processed without any errors. The executions were carried out. People died. Hartmann felt their deaths like weight added to his chest. But he had to maintain appearances. Had to demonstrate that his errors had been genuine mistakes, not sabotage. Then, slowly, carefully, he began losing documents again. January 19, 1943, the Brenner family was still alive. Personnel office, Smolensk Hartmann discovered this occupied Soviet transfer document that crossed his desk. The filing room occupied 42 prisoners from the October detention group before the transfer to a different facility. 3 tall windows faced south, blending in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, ink, still alive, and the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system should have been barely functioned anymore. Hartmann stared at the document inside the office hovered somewhere between 5 people from one family had survived because a clerk had forgotten to file a 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a document had been burned in a coal stove whenever he shifted his weight. Filing cabinet. His uniform was clean, this knowledge was in at the elbows. Hartmann his fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper he used to make copies of specific individuals who continued existing because of choices and the endless stream of administrative documents that fed choices he had failed to make. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Those 3 execution orders he had processed perfectly in late December. While other young men died in those operations, Stuttgart fought and died at places like people who might have lived if he had lost those documents the way he'd lost others, filed correspondence, the moral calculus was impossible. Record-keeping systems that German military administration demanded even in the chaos of the Eastern Front. Every document he filed properly killed people but maintained his cover. Organized. He was playing a game where success meant some deaths, double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. Through blood. His superior Dietrich noticed Hartmann's distraction. Had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Obergefreiter. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. I've been trying to focus on improving my performance. The room contained 16 filing cabinets. Has improved. Metal. Significantly. Gray. Perhaps you found your rhythm with alphanumeric codes that designated different categories of documents. But Hartmann hadn't personnel found transfers. He had found supply requisitions. A grim arithmetic of death and survival. Execution orders. He estimated he could safely lose approximately one document in cabinet without arousing fatal suspicion. Bottom drawer. 1 in 5. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations. That meant 80% of execution orders had the official terminology. 80% of the people whose names crossed his desk would die. The phrase covered many things. 20% might survive. Partisan sweeps. These were the mathematics of resistance in an administrative office. The shooting of hostages. Front. The liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. This was the worst part. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed decisions about who had the best chance of survival if given more time. By date. Families with children. Unit designation. Young people who might escape because reading was part of groups held in facilities closer to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it. He was playing God with paper and ink. So he read about villages choosing life and death with filing about decisions. Civilians executed as the responsibility was crushing. About Jewish populations transferred to people he had chosen and then disappearing from the administrative record. The documents he had filed correctly because losing them would have been too suspicious. That was his job. In February, another investigation began. Just administration. More serious this time. Someone had to maintain the divisions had noticed a pattern. Someone had to ensure the system orders from the Smolensk district office. Klaus Hartmann told himself high rate of administrative problems. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officers' quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like the rate was significantly higher than other districts. The office operated on a rigid schedule. A Sturmbannführer from the SS arrived to review security procedures. This was more dangerous than the Wehrmacht investigation. High priority items took sabotage seriously. Immediately. Very serious administrative materials he processed himself. Less. By 1700 hours, interviewed everything that had arrived that day should be detailed questions about his filing procedures and properly documented in the master his logs. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. Looked for his efficiency was appreciated. You're losing a lot of execution orders, noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. I'm not suggesting intent. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military execution orders disappear from your filing system and 3 times the rate of other delivery included 47 separate items. Hartmann had prepared for this from various units. Execution personnel come from multiple issuing divisions. Intelligence summaries. Different authorization chains. Medical reports. More complex delivery routes. Execution orders from different security divisions for documents to be lost in transit before they reach the execution order was routine. That's a reasonable explanation. If such a thing could be called routine. I believe it's the correct explanation. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food for the Jews being executed. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Dangerous. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. Met the Sturmbannführer's eyes. He would place it in Cabinet 12. I'm a soldier following orders under the unit designation that had executed. My personal feelings are irrelevant. The second execution order was different. Asked. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. I execute my duties to the best of my ability. If documents are being lost, it's due to systemic failures in the delivery chain, not my personal sentiments. The filing room occupied the third floor studied him for a municipal building before the German invasion. You're aware that administrative sabotage is punishable by death, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air. And you're aware that I have the authority to implement and the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned anymore. Yes, sir. The temperature inside the office hovers somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. Immediately. 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann from this office, a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. And we will have a different kind of conversation. His uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Hartmann sat at his desk were stained with ink sweat dry on carbon paper he used to make copies of orders, requisitions, barely casualty reports, but the game was over. Stream of administrative documents no more lost the machinery of occupation. No more administrative had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Every execution order that crossed his desk would be processed. That was his war. Or he would die. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and filed everything like Kursk and Kharkov, his efficiency was flawless. Documents, filed correspondence, every document went to the proper location. The meticulous record-keeping systems. Nothing was lost. Military administration demanded. Nothing was damaged. In the chaos of the Eastern Front. Nothing was misfiled. He was good at this work. People died. Methodical. Their names crossed his desk on execution confirmations. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. Buried in mass superior officer, Hauptmann Werner Dietrich, documented and commended him 3 times for his efficiency. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational precision. He could have saved some of them. The room could have lost the 16 filing cabinets. Could have created delays. Metal. But he chose his own survival instead. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes to keep designated different categories of documents. Keep maintaining the system. Personnel transfers. Keep being a good soldier. Supply requisitions. In early March, news arrived that Soviet forces were advancing execution orders. The Wehrmacht was evacuating non-essential personnel. 12. Administrative offices would be relocated. The documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations shipped to new locations. That was the official terminology. Hartmann spent 3 days preparing security the files operations. The phrase covered many things. Organized partisan sweeps. Every document accounted reprisal actions. Everything the shooting of hostages labeled. The liquidation of civilian functioning in a new military under someone else's management. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Hartmann worked alone in the office. Alphabetically. Everyone else had already departed. By unit designation. He was finishing the last administrative details because reading was part of filing. Ensuring nothing was left behind. You had to understand what a document contained. He sat at his desk and looked at Cabinet 12. So he read about villages burned. He walked over and about civilians executed as execution orders were all there. About Jewish populations transferred to alphabetically organized and then disappearing from the administrative record. Categorized. He read these things and then filed a perfect record of administrative efficiency supporting mass murder. Just paperwork. Hartmann removed the entire administration. He carried it to the coal stove in the corner. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. He began feeding documents. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. One by one at first. They helped him sleep at night in a narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. Execution operated on a rigid schedule. Implementation confirmation documents arrived at 0800. Security operation reports. Hartmann sorted them by priority and type. The flames consumed paper, items went to Hauptmann Dietrich's immediate dates, names, routine administrative record of hundreds of deaths dissolved into ash by 1700 hours. When the drawer was arrived that day, Hartmann closed the stove door if necessary, and properly the filing cabinet without its bottom drawer. The system worked because someone else wondered where those documents had gone. His efficiency was appreciated. Let them assume they'd been lost during evacuation. He had received a commendation noting that just another administrative failure in the chaos to locate any document within minutes. That night, the office building ability to quickly retrieve information German forces set fire to structures before abandoning the city to prevent Soviet forces from using them. The morning document delivery fire destroyed whatever documents remained. Whatever evidence existed of Klaus Hartmann's year managing the personnel transfer in Smolensk. Intelligence evacuated west with other administrative medical reports. The filing cabinets were loaded onto different security divisions operating in the district. But the first execution order was short of complete. If such a thing hundreds of execution orders had simply vanished from the official record. Of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He would place it in Cabinet 12, bottom drawer, under the unit designation that had executed the order. The second execution order was different. It had not yet been carried out. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. 3 days away. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Men, women, children. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. April 1943. Soviet forces captured the detention facility 17 kilometers from Smolensk, occupied Soviet territory. Among the prisoners liberated, the filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. Scheduled for execution in October, south, letting in pale still alive and caught dust particles suspended among in air that smelled of Brenner family, ink, and the faint residue of coal smoke from the heating system that barely functioned ages anymore. 8, 11, the temperature 14. Inside the office hovered Rachel Brenner walked out of detention after 7 barely months. Tolerable. She was 9 years old. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann she had survived metal because a document had been misfiled whenever he shifted his weight. Hartmann would never know his uniform was clean but he had been transferred to a different unit. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive given another administrative position managing records for a supply depot, casualty reports, he continued an endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. The war went on around him had been assigned to this office for 7 months. But he lost fewer documents now. That was his call with the SS Sturm. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart self-preservation outweighed like resistance in Kharkov, Klaus he was just one clerk, documents, filed correspondence, and maintained saving a few people wouldn't change the war's German military administration. Better to survive than to die for symbolic gestures. He was good at these were the things he told himself. Methodical. They helped him organized. Sometimes. The kind of man who double-checked the Red Army advance and made certain every document ended up in its proper folder. Administrative offices packed and unpacked Werner Dietrich as frontline commended him 3 times for his efficiency. Hartmann moved from Poland to Germany. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of personnel organizational precision. From filing system to filing 16 filing cabinets. He was very good at his work. Efficient. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes. His brief period of administrative errors in Smolensk was forgotten. Personnel transfers. Just a difficult posting. Supply requisitions. Everyone had difficulties on the intelligence summaries. Hartmann had returned to forms. He was a valuable clerk occupied cabinet number 12. In April 1945, bottom drawer, the war ended. The documents inside detailed the American forces in Bavaria operations. He was processed as a regular Wehrmacht soldier. Security operation about his service. The phrase covered many things. Had he participated in atrocities, partisan sweeps? Had he witnessed war crimes, reprisal actions? He answered honestly. The shooting of hostages. He was a clerk. The liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military security. He had never shot anyone. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. Had never participated in security operations. By date. Just administrative designation. Supporting the army because reading was part of filing. Doing his job. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize a POW camp. So he read about villages burned. His family's home was still executed as punishment for partisan activity. His parents had survived. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points and they welcomed him back as if he returned from a difficult job in a foreign country rather than 6 years of war service. That was his job. Hartmann got a job as a clerk in a municipal office. Just administration. He was good at administrative work. Someone had to maintain the records. Methodical. Someone had to ensure the system functioned properly. He filed documents. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. Kept systems running smoothly. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance like permanent thunder. Had 2 children. The office operated on a rigid schedule. Lived in a modest apartment. Morning documents arrived at 0 for 30 years before retiring. Hartmann sorted them by priority reliable. High priority items went to help the kind of man who showed up on time and did his work without administrative materials he processed himself. He never told anyone about Smolensk. By 1700 hours, never mentioned the filing arrived that day should be filed. Never talked about execution orders and properly documented in the master log. It was simply a period of his life Hartmann that he didn't discuss. His efficiency was generation were the same way. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any document within minutes. But sometimes Hartmann would lie awake at night retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. Thinking about the documents he had filed correctly and the morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Thinking about the people who had died because he chose his own survival over their lives. Personnel transfer or had lived because he temporarily found courage before losing it again. Medical reports. The mathematics haunted him. And 2 execution orders from different security divisions operating in the district. The first execution order was routine. How many had he failed to say could be called routine? Hundreds. It concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to correctly represented deaths he could have prevented. The order had already been carried out. The documents he had lost represented lives he had saved. Hartmann was simply receiving the administrative confirmation for filing. He didn't know. He would place it in cabinet 12. He would never know. Bottom drawer. The records had designation that had executed the evidence had been destroyed. The second execution order was to calculate the sum of his choices. It had not yet been carried out. Whether his life had added more death for implementation on October 17th. In 1963, 3 days away, Hartmann read a newspaper article concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Was being prosecuted for participating in mass executions on the Eastern Front. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67. The trial discussed how administrative personnel who processed execution orders could be considered complicit in the murders. Hartmann put the newspaper down. His hands were shaking. Complicit. That was the word. He had been complicit. For every document he filed correctly, he had been complicit in murder. Filing paperwork was participating in the system. The system killed people. Therefore, filing paperwork killed people. But he had also resisted. Passively. Quietly. Losing documents. Creating delays. Saving lives. Did that resistance absolve the complicity? Did preventing some deaths balance out enabling others? There was no answer. No calculation that resolved the moral equation. Hartmann had been both complicit and resistant. Both murderer and rescuer. Both enabler and saboteur. The contradictions were irreconcilable. He never faced prosecution. Clerks who filed paperwork were not priorities for war crimes investigators. The prosecutors focused on people who had pulled triggers, signed death warrants, commanded execution squads. Administrative personnel who maintained filing systems were considered too minor. too indirect. Their role in the machinery of death was acknowledged but not pursued. Hartmann lived with that knowledge. The knowledge that he had been important enough to save some lives but unimportant enough to escape justice for failing to save others. Important and unimportant simultaneously. A contradiction he carried into old age. In 1982, a researcher contacted Hartmann, a historian studying Wehrmacht administrative procedures on the Eastern Front. The researcher had found references to unusual document losses from the Smolensk district filing office in 1943-44. Was Hartmann the clerk who had managed that office? Yes, Hartmann confirmed. He had been stationed there. Could he explain the high rate of lost execution orders? Chaos of war, Hartmann said. Difficult conditions. Administrative system under strain. Documents were lost throughout the Wehrmacht's filing systems. Nothing unusual about Smolensk specifically. The researcher seemed satisfied with this explanation. The resulting academic paper mentioned Hartmann's office as an example of how wartime conditions degraded administrative efficiency. No hint of suspicion. No suggestion of sabotage. Just bureaucratic failure under stress. Hartmann read the paper. He recognized the dry academic language describing his year of calculated chaos. The researcher had no idea that document losses had been deliberate. That filing errors had been chosen. That administrative inefficiency had been resistance. Nobody knew except Hartmann himself. And the weight of that knowledge defined the last years of his life. October 14, 1943. Klaus Hartmann was 74 years old. Personnel office, Smolensk district, occupied living in a care facility in Stuttgart. The filing room his wife had died 3 years earlier in a municipal building before his the German visited invasion. Occasionally but not often. 3 tall windows faced they south, had their own letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled Hartmann of paper. Spent most days sitting by a window watching traffic pass on the street system that barely functioned anymore. Sometimes he read. The temperature inside the office he just hovered somewhere between uncomfortably his mind increasingly returned to events from 50 years earlier. 22-year-old Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann office sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. Drawer. His uniform was clean lost and documents that should have been lost but weren't. His fingers were stained with ink from the facility noticed Hartmann used to make copies of orders, requisitions, she asked if he was feeling well, reports, and the endless stream of administrative documents that fed the machinery of occupation. Hartmann hesitated. Hartmann had been assigned to this office for 7 months. Not everything. He processed not the details. That was his fragments. While other young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died at places like Kursk and Kharkov, had made some mistakes, Hartmann stamped documents, had filed some papers that should have been maintained the meticulous record-keeping systems if it had that German military administration the social worker listened in the chaos of the Eastern Front. Many of the elderly residents talked about the war. Methodical. It was a defining experience for that generation. The kind of man who double-checked filing codes and made certain every document that administrative errors happened to everyone. His superior officer, to feel guilty about after 50 years, had commended him 3 times for his efficiency. But Hartmann wasn't seeking absolution. The filing system Hartmann maintained speaking a model of German organizational precision, giving voice to knowledge that had remained internal for 5 decades. The social worker didn't understand what she was hearing. Each one labeled with alphanumeric that the old man designating different categories of talking about resistance. Personnel transfer. Small resistance. Supply requisition. Resistance. Intelligence the only resistance available to a clerk who didn't have the courage for anything more dramatic. That last category occupied one night cabinet number 1995, Hartmann couldn't sleep. The documents in his chest detailed the implementation of security operations. He walked to the common room of the care facility. That was the official terminology. Turned on a television. Security operations. A documentary about the war was covered many things. Footage of concentration camps. Reprisal with numbers tattooed on their arms. The shooting of hostages. Mass graves being the liquidation of civilians deemed threats to military for 5 minutes. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything else. He thought about Rachel Brenner. By date, 8 years old by in October 1943 /. He read them because reading was part of 60 years old now if she had survived. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. The question had haunted him for 50 years. So he read about villages burned. The Brenner family had been transferred away executed as punishment for partisan 1944 /. About Jewish populations transferred to collection points and then disappearing from prisoners often died in transit. He read these things and then destinations. That was his job. The final chaotic months of the war. Just paperwork. But maybe the administration. Maybe Rachel Brenner had the grown-ups. Had children to ensure the system functioned properly. Had lived a full life. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day instead of filed. They helped him sleep at night in the narrow bunk in the officer's quarters where he could hear artillery rumbling in the distance. Maybe Hartmann's resistance had only delayed her death. The office operated on a rigid schedule. Maybe all his careful documents arrived at zero, nothing except temporary postponements. Hartmann sorted them by priority. He would never know. The uncertainty was perhaps worse than knowing would immediately. If he knew his choices had saved specific people, himself, he could claim that justification. By 1700 hours, if he knew his choices had accomplished nothing, filed, he could at least stop wondering, and properly documented. But the not knowing meant he existed in permanent ambiguity. The system worked because Hartmann made Schrodinger's resistance fighter. His efficiency was simultaneously effective and ineffective until observation that his filing system allowed senior officers to locate any 3 months later. February 1996 retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. He was 75 years old. On October 14, the morning document delivery in the local newspaper 47 separate items. Klaus Hartmann, supply requests from various units, survived by 2 personnel transfer orders. No mention of military service. Medical reports. No mention of Smolensk. And 2 execution orders. No mention of filing systems or lost operating in the district. His children cleaned out his apartment at the care facility. If such a thing could be evidence of his wartime experiences, it concerned the shooting of 12 civilians accused of providing food to partisan units. No letters. The order had already been carried out. Just the possessions of an old man who had lived an unremarkable life. Simply receiving the administrative confirmation his belongings to charity and moved on with their lives. He would place it in Cabinet 12. The only physical trace of unit designation that had was his military service record in Wehrmacht. The second execution order was different. Minimal documentation. It had not yet been carried out. Clerical positions. It was scheduled for administration on October 17. No commendations 3 days away. No disciplinary actions noted. 42 people who had been held in temporary service record for an unremarkable soldier. Men, women, but children in formerly Soviet territory. Ages ranging from 8 years old to 67 had exposed a mass grave from 1943 /. Local residents contacted authorities. An investigation began. Forensic anthropologists exhumed remains. Historians researched records. They identified some victims. Others remained anonymous. Among the identified were families from villages near Smolensk. Jews who had been shot in security operations. The investigations found no execution orders for some of these groups. No administrative documentation of their deaths. The records had been lost or destroyed. Perhaps deliberately. Perhaps accidentally. No way to know. And somewhere in Israel, an elderly woman named Rachel Brenner lived in Tel Aviv. She had emigrated in 1948 /. Had married. Had children and grandchildren. She remembered being held in detention near Smolensk in 1943 /. Remembered waiting to be shot. Remembered the execution being delayed. Delayed again. Delayed until transfer. Delayed until liberation. She never knew why the execution had been delayed. Administrative chaos, she assumed. The Wehrmacht system breaking down as they retreated. She had been lucky. That was all. Just luck that she had survived when so many others hadn't. She didn't know about a clerk named Klaus Hartmann. Didn't know about a document that had been burned instead of filed. Didn't know that her survival had been the result of deliberate choices rather than random chance. Nobody knew except Hartmann. And Hartmann had taken that knowledge to his grave without ever speaking it fully aloud. The documents were destroyed. The evidence was gone. The truth existed only in the memory of one man who had chosen to be unreliable at exactly the right moments. And that memory dissolved with his death. Leaving behind only questions that would never be answered. The story of Klaus Hartmann raises questions that have no satisfying answers. Wehrmacht personnel office. Was he a hero? District, occupied Soviet territory. The filing room occupied the third floor of what had been a municipal building before the German invasion. People who should have died according to orders but didn't because documents were lost, south, letting in pale autumn light that caught dust particles suspended in air that smelled of paper, ink, and thousands of documents crossed his desk in the heating system that barely functioned anymore. He processed most of them correctly. The temperature inside the office hovered somewhere between uncomfortably cold and just barely tolerable. The execution orders he filed killed people as surely as if he had Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann sat at a metal desk that wobbled slightly whenever he shifted his weight. Can both be true simultaneously? His uniform was clean but worn both rescue and accomplice. His fingers were stained with ink from the primitive carbon paper. The historical record gives us no simple requisitions, casualty administrative personnel and the stream of occupied ambiguous moral the machinery of occupation. They didn't directly kill anyone. Hartmann had been assigned to this office but the machinery of genocide required administrators. He processed paperwork. Required clerks. That was his war. required filing young men from his hometown near Stuttgart fought and died without administrative support. The industrial-scale killing would have been impossible. Filed correspondence. Every person who maintained that administrative machinery shares responsibility for its administration demanded even in the chaos every document correctly filed. He was good every order properly processed. Methodical. Every system kept functioning despite its purpose. The kind of man who double-checked filing this responsibility exists every document ended up in its proper folder. The fact that Hartmann occasionally lost documents doesn't absolve him for the documents he filed for his efficiency. The filing system Hartmann maintained was a model of German organizational cancel out enabling others. The room contained 16 filing cabinets, limited as it was. Metal represented more courage than most people managed. Each one labeled with alphanumeric codes. The vast majority of designated different categories of documents. And bureaucrats who served the Wehrmacht and SS filed their documents correctly. Supply requisitions. They maintained the intelligence summaries. They did their jobs. Execution orders. They didn't ask questions or create problems or lose cabinet number 12. Hartmann did. Drawer. Not the documents inside detailed the implementation of security operations, but enough to matter. That was the official terminology. Some people survived who shouldn't have security administrative record. The phrase matters because it demonstrates what was possible. Partisan sweeps, even for ordinary people in ordinary positions. The shooting of hostages, even for clerks with no weapons and no authority. Of civilians deemed threats to military security if people chose it. Hartmann filed these documents the same way he filed everything individuals decided their moral obligations outweighed their professional ones. By most individuals didn't make that decision. He read them because reading was part of sometimes. You had to understand what a document contained in order to categorize it properly. But he made it. So he read about villages him from the vast majority who never even civilians executed as punishment for partisan activity. We don't know how many people Hartmann saved. About Jewish populations transferred the records to collection points and then disappearing from the administrative record. Many people who might have survived because of his actions died later from other causes. Just paperwork. The chaos of the war's end just administration. Someone had to maintain the records. Disease. Someone had to ensure the retreating German forces. Klaus Hartmann told himself these things every day. Rachel Brenner's survival is in a narrow bunk in the officer's quarters. We know she could hear artillery rumbling in the distance. We can trace her story from detention through transfer through liberation on a rigid schedule. A long life. Morning documents arrived as one person definitively saved by administrative sabotage by priority and type. But there are probably others. High-priority items went to people whose survival was enabled by delays and routine administrative materials he processed himself created in Wehrmacht security by 1700 hours. Everything that had arrived that day should be filed, copied if necessary, and properly documented in the master log. The uncertainty is permanent. The system worked because Hartmann made it work. What we know for certain is this. His efficiency was at the opportunity to resist genocide. He had received a commendation noting that his filing system allowed senior officers to use those to locate any document within minutes. Not always. This ability to quickly retrieve information was considered essential to military effectiveness. In ways that mattered. On October 14th, the morning document delivery included 47 separate items. Chose to stop resisting when personal risks became too great. Personnel transfer orders. Chose to file documents correctly when doing otherwise would have exposed him. Medical reports. This choice is understandable. And 2 execution orders from perhaps even security divisions operating in the district. Dead resistors saved nobody. The first execution order was routine. Allowed continued resistance, if such a thing could be called routine. But the choice meant concerned the shooting of 12 civilians who could have been providing Hartmann had been more courageous. The order had already been carried out 3 days earlier. If he had considered their lives more important than his own survival, the administrative confirmation these are the impossible choices that ordinary people faced in extraordinary circumstances. Under the unit designation the Holocaust was implemented by bureaucrats. The second execution order was different. By administrators who filed papers and maintained systems. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17. The machinery of genocide required millions of small acts of compliance. The order concerned a group of 42 people who had been held in temporary detention since September. Every document correctly filed was a decision. Children. Every ages ranging from 8 years old to 67 represented someone choosing bureaucratic efficiency over human life. Most people made those choices without apparent struggle. They filed the documents. Did their jobs. Went home. Slept soundly. Convinced themselves they were just following orders. Just doing what they were told. Just maintaining the system. Hartmann made those choices too. But sometimes he made different choices. Sometimes he chose human life over bureaucratic efficiency. Those moments of choosing differently are important precisely because they were so rare. The story of the execution order that was accidentally misfiled is not a story of heroism. Smolensk district. It's a story of partial Soviet territory. of inadequate
The filing room
courage,
occupied the third floor
of someone who did slightly more than nothing when almost everyone else did nothing at all.
3 tall windows
That
faced
slight
south,
difference
letting in
saved
pale
lives.
autumn light that caught dust
Not enough
particles
lives.
suspended in air that smelled of
Never
paper,
enough.
ink, and the faint
But
residue
some.
of coal smoke from the heating
Some people
system
walked
that
away
barely
from
functioned
detention
anymore.
facilities and death pits
The temperature
because
inside
clerk
the
lost
office
paperwork.
hovered somewhere between
That
uncomfortably
fact
cold
matters.
and just barely tolerable.
It means the system could have been
22-year-old
resisted more
Obergefreiter
widely.
Klaus Hartmann sat
Could have
at a
been
metal desk
sabotaged
that
more
wobbled
effectively.
slightly whenever he shifted his
Could have
weight.
been defeated from within if
His
more people
uniform
had
was
made
clean
different
but worn
choices.
thin at the elbows.
They didn't.
His fingers were
Hartmann
stained with
did,
ink from the
sometimes.
primitive carbon paper he used to
And
make
that
copies of
distinction,
orders,
however small,
requisitions,
represents the
casualty
moral
reports,
space between
and the
absolute
endless stream of
complicity
administrative
and
documents
inadequate
that fed the
resistance.
machinery of occupation.
We remember the Holocaust through its
Hartmann had been
victims and
assigned
its
to this office
perpetrators.
for 7 months.
The murdered and the
He
murderers.
processed paperwork. The innocent and
That
the
was
guilty.
his war.
But most
While
people
other young men
occupied
from
his
his
hometown
category
near
entirely,
Stuttgart fought and died at
they
places like
existed in the
Kursk and
vast middle
Kharkov.
ground of
Klaus
cooperation
Hartmann
and
stamped
resistance,
documents,
filed
compliance and
correspondence,
sabotage,
and maintained
enabling
meticulous
meticulous
record
record-keeping systems that
Klaus
German
Hartmann
military
lived in that middle
administration
ground.
demanded even in the chaos of the
Filed
Eastern
documents
Front.
that killed people.
He was good at this
Lost
work. Documents that saved
Methodical.
people. Maintained
Organized.
systems of death while
The
occasionally
kind of
breaking
man
them.
who
double-checked filing
enabled
codes and made
genocide
certain
while
every
occasionally
document ended up
preventing
in
it.
its proper folder.
This contradiction is
His
uncomfortable.
superior officer, Hauptmann It would
Werner
be easier
Dietrich,
to classify him
commended
as
him
simply
3
good
times
or
for his
simply bad.
efficiency.
But the
filing
filing
system
system
Hartmann
Hartmann maintained was a model
He
of
was
German
both.
organizational precision.
Simultaneously,
The room contained
the
16
documents he
filing
filed
cabinets.
correctly
Correctly weigh against the documents
Metal.
he lost.
gray.
The lives he enabled
Each one
killing
labeled
balance
with alphanumeric
uneasily
codes
against the
that
lives he
designated
saved.
different categories of documents.
There is no final calculation
Personnel
that resolves
transfers.
this equation. Supply
No
judgment
judgment
that
that
feels entirely just.
Intelligence summaries.
Hartmann was complicit in mass
Execution
murders.
That
Hartmann
last
saved
category
lives. Occupied cabinet number
Both
12.
statements are true.
Bottom drawer. Both must be held in
The
mind
documents inside
simultaneously.
detailed the implementation
This
of security
uncomfortable truth
operations.
applies to millions of people
That
who
was the
lived through
official
those
terminology.
years. The Holocaust
Security
was not
operations.
implemented by a small number
The
of fanatics.
phrase covered many things.
It was implemented by
Partisan
ordinary
sweeps.
bureaucrats doing their jobs.
Reprisal actions.
Filing papers.
The shooting of hostages.
Processing orders. The liquidation of civilians
Maintaining
deemed
systems.
threats to military security.
Making the machinery of death
Hartmann
function
filed
smoothly.
these documents the same way
Each
he
of those
filed everything
bureaucrats
else. Could have been Klaus Hartmann.
Alphabetically.
Could have lost
By
documents.
date.
Could
By
have
unit
created
designation.
delays.
Could
He
have
read them because
sabotaged the
reading was
system
part
from
of within
filing.
using only administrative
You had to
tools.
understand
what a document
Most
contained in
didn't.
order to categorize it
Hartmann
properly.
did, sometimes.
So he read about villages
And
burned.
those
times matter because they
About
demonstrate
civilians
what was
executed
possible
as
but not
punishment
chosen for partisan activity.
The filing cabinet sits
About
in
Jewish
memory now.
populations transferred to
Cabinet
collection
12,
points and then
bottom
disappearing
drawer,
from
where
the administrative
execution
orders were supposed to go.
He read these things and
Some
then
made it
filed
there.
them.
That
Some
was his
didn't.
job. That
Just
fact created
paperwork.
uncertainty in a
Just
system that demanded
administration.
precision. Someone had to
Uncertainty
maintain the
saved
records.
lives.
Someone
One
had to
clerk.
ensure the system functioned
One
properly.
filing
System. Klaus Hartmann
1 year
told
of
himself
calculated
these chaos
chaos
every
among
day.
millions of correctly
They helped
processed
him sleep at
documents.
night in the narrow bunk in
The
the
impact
officer's
was
quarters where he
infinitesimal
could
compared to the
rumbling
genocide
at distance
scale.
like permanent thunder.
But for the people whose
The office
execution orders
operated
were
on a
lost,
rigid schedule.
the
impact was everything. Morning documents
They
arrived
lived
at
when they
0
should have
800.
died.
They
Hartmann
survived
sorted
because
them by
someone chose
priority and type.
unreliability over efficiency.
High-priority items went to
That
Hauptmann
choice,
Dietrich
however
immediately.
small and inconsistent,
Routine
represents
administrative
the possibility of
materials he
resistance
processed
in
himself.
circumstances that seem
By
to allow none.
1700 hours,
The
everything
possibility
that,
that
that
ordinary
day should be
people in
filed,
ordinary
copied if
positions can choose
necessary,
differently and properly documented
can
in the master
sabotage
log.
systems from within.
The system worked
Can
because
save
Hartmann
lives
made
using
work.
only
the tools of bureaucracy
His efficiency
and
was
administration.
appreciated.
Most
He had
people don't
received
make
a
that
commendation
choice.
noting that his filing system
Hartmann
allowed
made it senior
sometimes.
officers to locate any document
Sometimes
within
is not
minutes.
enough.
This
But it's
ability
more
to
than
quickly
never.
retrieve information was
And the
considered
lives
essential
saved by
to
sometimes
military
mattered
effectiveness.
absolutely to the people living
On
them.
October 14th,
The
the morning
execution
document
order that was
delivery
accidentally
included
misfiled
47
was not
separate
an
items.
accident.
It was
Supply
a choice
requests
from various units.
A small choice.
Personnel transfer
An inadequate
orders.
choice.
Intelligence
But a
summaries.
choice nonetheless.
Medical reports.
And every choice like it represents
and
a
two
moment when
execution
one
orders
person
decided
decided
that
security
human life
divisions
mattered more
operating
than
in
administrative efficiency. The first execution
conscience
order was
mattered more
routine.
than compliance.
If such a thing
That
could
doing
be called
something
routine,
inadequate
was better than doing
It
nothing
concerned
at
the
all.
shooting of 12 civilians
These moments
accused
don't
of providing
redeem the
food
system.
to partisan units.
Don't absolve the
The order
complicity.
had already been carried out.
Don't
3
balance
days
out the
earlier.
deaths that occurred when documents
Hartmann
were
was
processed
simply
correctly.
receiving the administrative
But they
confirmation
proved
for
the system
filing.
could have been resisted.
He would place it in cabinet
Could have been
12,
broken.
bottom drawer,
Could have been
unit
defeated if more
designation
people
that
had made
executed
different
the order.
choices. The second
paper has
execution
dissolved
order
into
was
ash.
different. The
It had
filing
not cabinets have rusted away. It was scheduled for implementation on October 17th. But the questions
3 days
remain.
away.
What
The
would you
order
have done with
concerned
the
a group of
execution
42
order on your
people
desk
who have been held in temporary
Would you have
detention
filed it
since
correctly?
September?
Lost
Men,
it accidentally,
women,
children.
Burned it deliberately.
Ages ranging from 8 years
Most
old to
people want to
67.
believe they would have resisted.
The evidence suggests most people wouldn't have. Klaus Hartmann resisted sometimes. And those times, however inadequate, are all that stand between absolute complicity and the possibility of conscience in impossible circumstances. The weight of that knowledge doesn't resolve cleanly. Doesn't provide comfortable answers. Doesn't let us categorize Hartmann as simply hero or villain. He was a clerk who sometimes lost documents. Sometimes. In a system where those losses saved lives. Sometimes. Sometimes is not enough. But sometimes is more than nothing. And in the mathematics of genocide, every life saved counts absolutely, even when the counting can never be completed.